Hi, and welcome to the NIH Blueprint Diversity Specialized Predoctoral to Postdoctoral Advancement in Neuroscience, also known as the DSPAN Award webinar. This is the F99 K00 mechanism. So today, just wanted to give you a few quick notes before we start. A recording of this webinar and the slides will be available on the NINDS website and the NIH Neuroscience Blueprint website a few weeks after the webinar. The presentation itself will last for around an hour, and then we'll have the rest of the time for questions. So during the webinar itself, you will be muted, and we're going to ask you to type your questions into the Q&A box, which you should see on the right side of your screen. And the Q&A, like I said, will be at the end of the webinar. If your question wasn't answered during the webinar, please email us so we can help you. So today, we'll go through the introductions of our two speakers. We'll talk about what the NIH Blueprint is, as it's a little different than mechanisms that are funded solely by an institute or center. We will go through the eligibility requirements for the F99 K00, the program goals. We'll go through all the application components and the review criteria, and then we'll have our Q&A. Okay, so our speakers today are Dr. Nancy Desmond, who is the Associate Director of Research Training and Career Development and Chief Neuroendocrinology and Neuroimmunology Program in the Division of Neuroscience and Basic Behavioral Science at the National Institute of Mental Health, and Dr. Michelle Jones-London, who's Chief Office of Programs to Enhance Neuroscience Workforce Diversity at the National Institute of Neurological Disorders and Stroke. So take it away, Michelle.
First, thank you all again for your interest and for making time to attend this webinar today. I think we can all agree that the field of neuroscience over the recent years has achieved many new exciting research advances, and the data shows that the trainees that have increased in terms of receiving PhDs in neuroscience has reflected that. However, when it comes to diversity, diversity remains an issue across the biomedical workforce, and neuroscience is unfortunately no different in terms of smaller numbers. According to NSF, the data shows that only about 11% of those enrolled in U.S. neuroscience graduate programs were from diverse groups. NIH believes that engaging trainees and researchers from every segment of the American society is necessary to leverage the U.S. intellectual capital. The diversity of our country's population is an extraordinary resource whose potential can only be realized by fully engaging the talent, intelligence, and drive of all of its members, regardless of race, ethnicity, or disability. Also, studies show that this is the right thing to do from a standpoint of science, that a diverse workforce results in higher quality scientific research through greater innovation, creativity, and discovery. So now that we have talked about the need, let's talk a little bit about why this initiative. While many are excited about the research areas blooming within the field of neuroscience, many trainees, perhaps even you yourself who are listening to this webinar, may feel that the current research environment is very challenging and perhaps have even gone back and forth on whether the research career is even a desirable one. The goal of this initiative is not to convince you that this is the right path for you, but to provide support, mentorship, and resources for those who do see this as becoming an independent neuroscience researcher as a viable pathway to use your talents, your passions, and the goal of this initiative really does align with the NIH diversity goal to create seamless transitions for biomedical career advancement and progression. Keep in mind, as Lauren already cited, that this new pilot program is bigger than just one neuroscience NIH institute. It is being funded by the NIH Blueprint as a collaborative and coordinated effort. On the right side of the slide and at the top of the funding opportunity announcement, or the RFA, you can see a list of the 13 participating NIH institutes and centers. By pooling resources and expertise, the NIH Blueprint is taking advantage of economies of scale and confronting challenges too large for any single NIH institute or center. Blueprint-eligible programs are cross-cutting and benefit the broad neuroscience community. The goals for increasing diversity in the neuroscience aligns with this mission and aligns with the overarching goals and purpose of the NIH Blueprint. This D-SPAN, which we call it, or the F99 K00 award, is intended for individuals who have demonstrated an interest in any neuroscience research career in an NIH Blueprint mission-relevant area. And for this particular announcement, we have also included perhaps something that you've heard about, the BRAIN Initiative. So BRAIN Initiative research areas are also eligible. The BRAIN Initiative, or Brain Research through Advancing Innovative Neurotechnologies, is part of a public-private collaborative effort aimed at developing new experimental tools that will revolutionize our understanding of the brain. You can learn more about the NIH Blueprint and also the BRAIN Initiative by going to their respective home pages. So now, back to what is the D-SPAN? The NIH Blueprint D-SPAN program really does seek to increase the levels of participation of diverse trainees transitioning from graduate student to postdoctoral positions. And it will do this by providing a continuum of support throughout what we consider a very critical postgraduate career stage. We will do this by creating accountability, a structured process for ongoing assessment, enhancing mentorship that you receive in both phases, and empowering diverse trainees to choose postdoctoral environments that match your skills and your scientific interests without worrying about financial constraints. This two-phased award will facilitate completion of the doctoral dissertation and transition talented graduate students to strong neuroscience research postdoctoral positions, and also not only the research component, but the career development opportunities relevant to getting you to the long-term career goal of becoming an independent neuroscience researcher. Now, probably the most important part, and I hope we don't lose people along the way. We don't want anyone investing time in writing an application that does not match the NIH policy or eligibility requirements. If that happens, the application will end up being withdrawn and not considered for review. So first, this is a diversity award. You must be a member of one of the recognized NIH diversity groups based on underrepresentation on a national basis, appropriate for this career stage. You can either be eligible based on underrepresentation by race or ethnicity. NSF data shows that the following groups would be included in this category for neuroscience. That's African Americans, Hispanic Americans, American Indians, Alaska Natives, Native Hawaiians, and other Pacific Islanders. The other category of eligibility includes those individuals with disabilities. That's defined as those with a physical or a mental impairment that substantially limits one or more of your major life activities. The other thing is that to apply, you must also be a U.S. citizen or permanent resident by the time of the award. Current F31 awardees and appointees on T32s are eligible to apply, but of course you cannot hold two training awards at the same time. If you do receive the D-SPAN, you would have to end your appointment on either the F31 or the T32. For dual degree or professional doctorate students, such as MDs, MD PhDs, you are not eligible because this training timeline that we have is really not compatible with your current, the training that you would receive for this dual degree. At the time of award, applicants are expected to have 1 to 2 years to complete their PhD dissertation research, that is the F99 phase, before transitioning to the mentored postdoctoral research training phase, and that's the K00. In this case, if we look at that from the 1 to 2 years, this typically means that an applicant should be in their 3rd or 4th year of graduate school when you apply. If you are outside of that range, you are allowed to apply, but you must make a strong case for why you will either finish early or need additional training in the lab beyond the 6 years. Instead, we recommend that perhaps you consider applying for the new NINDS F32, or also the BRAIN Initiative has an F32, which allows you to apply up to a year before you actually enter your postdoc lab. To ask about the exceptions to the 3rd and the 4th year eligibility, please feel free to just contact me. Some examples of acceptable exceptions could include someone who had a documented leave of absence due to your health, or for someone applying in year 2 who's had an MS degree and is expected to graduate within 2 years. Part of your application will contain verification by your institution that you're at the dissertation phase and are currently in a PhD program that is neuroscience relevant, and that you yourself have a desire to have a career as an independent investigator in neuroscience research. And finally, when it comes to eligibility, a really important component of this is that you must have mission relevance to at least one of the neuroscience institutes listed on the FOA, as I previously described on slide number 7. As always, if you have any specific questions about your eligibility, we're more than happy to receive your questions. Just email us. In terms of award details, this mechanism involves 2 phases of funding. It provides 1 to 2 years of support for completing your PhD dissertation in the F99 phase, and up to 4 years of support for postdoctoral training in the K00 phase. Awardees will receive the F99 funding near the end of the dissertation research and can then bring the 4 years of the K00 to the selected postdoc at any U.S. institution. You do not have to have a postdoctoral position or mentor established at the time of your application submission. In the majority of cases, your K00 postdoc will be at a different institution and with a different mentor. The application includes career goals and objectives, the applicant's plan for career development training activities during your award period, and your bio sketches and other documents. If approved, the K00 support will go for 4 years of the postdoctoral research, but it's not automatic to receive just this K00 just because you had the F99. As I stated, you'll have to put in an application to get prior approval. If the applicant begins a postdoctoral position or completes all of your PhD dissertation requirements before an F99 award is actually made, neither the F99 award nor the K00 award will be issued. This slide just highlights what we've talked about already in terms of career stage eligibility, but also gives you a little bit more detail in terms of the funding that you would expect to receive if you were an awardee. The stipend level is the same as for the F31. It includes tuition and fees allowable at this phase only, and an institutional allowance, including things like insurance, supplies, etc. The K00 phase, as I mentioned already, is up to 4 years. You get up to $50,000 towards the salary of your career and $3,000 towards the research development costs. For this initiative, or for this application, we are requesting a letter of intent. The letter of intent, the purpose is to help anticipate and manage the review panel. NIH policy is that letters of intent are non-binding, but we really do encourage you to submit one. The other thing is that perhaps in your travels or through talking through peers or your mentor, you've heard of the other F99 that NIH has, the one that's at NCI, or the National Cancer Institute. Unlike the NCI F99, more than one person may apply from any institution. We highly encourage everyone who is eligible to apply, even if others from your institution are also applying. So before you start, things to keep in mind, and you should be discussing this with your mentor. The first thing is really think about your career goals. Define your career goals and the area of your research interests. keeping in mind that, once again, it has to fit one of the NIH Blueprint research interests are the BRAIN Initiative research areas. The second thing is to outline the techniques, skills, knowledge, and relationships necessary to achieve your career goals. What will you need to make that transition to a postdoc and beyond? The third, and a very important thing, is it's a good thing to identify your strengths, but it's also a good thing to do a gap analysis and decide what skills are lacking, what skills do need to be developed. The fourth is to define your research plan. How will the two phases of your research, the F99 and the K00, build off your existing strengths to provide you with the skills, techniques, and data that will lead you to success? The fifth, build a training plan that is tailored to you. Don't have a training plan that is borrowed from other awards that may be in the lab or from other people. The training plan should really speak to your needs, your talents. This is something that really has to be specific for you. Number six, assess guidance and mentorship that is needed. What will you learn from the identified mentor? And keep in mind that what we see a lot of in terms of the training world is that sometimes it's more than one mentor. It could be a co-mentor or a mentoring team. And are all the areas of your development covered? So just in general, for the F99 phase, you're going to be provided support to finish the dissertation research. We expect an outstanding application to articulate a thoughtful research project that has a clearly stated rationale, goes beyond experimental details, and offers perspective about the work's expected outcomes and significance. For the K00, most applicants will not have, and probably shouldn't have, a commitment to a postdoc lab. We don't expect a whole lot of detail, but we expect the applicant to articulate in broad strokes the future research direction and what is needed to develop the career through to the next stage. Now, Dr. Nancy Desmond from NIMH will detail the application components and provide guidance for submitting a competitive application in response to this unusual type of mechanism. Nancy?
Great, thanks, Michelle. I want to talk about some of the nuts and bolts of this application. And first, provide some very general guidance. First, in the next few slides, I'll be talking about particular sections of the application. These sections refer to where you may find instructions in the application guide. Some of the instructions are in the general application guide. Some of them are in the fellowship-specific guide. There's an important point to keep in mind. And it's a little confusing, there is a hierarchy that you need to know about when you're reading all of these instructions and figuring out which instructions to follow. So first you have the NIH application guide, which gives you very general instructions. It's kind of like the highest level kind of instruction. Then second, there are very specific instructions for particular types of applications. For example, for individual fellowships, they are covered in Section 9 of the application guide. And then third, there is the specific funding announcement to which you're applying, in this case, the RFA for DSPAN. If there is different advice offered in each of these particular instructions, it's important to remember that the RFA always would overrule the application guide. And so if there is an apparent conflict in the instructions, you follow the instructions in the RFA itself. So it's very important that you read the entire FOA carefully, including the review criteria, as well as reading the fellowship instructions as you're putting your application together. So this is what the grants.gov website page will look like when you view a funding opportunity. You need to download the application package and the instructions for this RFA. There are links in the RFA that will allow you to do this, or you can use Assist. Both of these are available in the FOA. An important point, if you don't already have a Commons ID account, you need to get one now, because you cannot submit an application if you don't have a Commons ID. Your institutional official is the one to go to. They will help you obtain this important ID. You also need to refer to the table of page limits for fellowships, which will tell you how many pages you're allowed to have for each section of your application. There are a number of different application software packages that are available to help you in terms of putting together an NIH application. Each institution typically has their preferred software package. But regardless, the application components are the same. So specific instructions for your application. You need to use the SF424 R&R fellowship package. This is the same one that's used for all fellowships at the NIH. However, the specific aims and research strategy sections for this particular RFA follow a non-traditional format, which we will talk about more during the webinar. Other sections are much more similar to the predoctoral fellowship program application. So there are a number of required forms, and this slide shows you a list of these forms. There are mandatory forms, 5 of those, and then there are several optional forms. Each form has several parts. The first form is called SF424 R&R, the second, the fellowship supplemental form, etc. And we're going to go through each one of these in subsequent slides. There are also 2 optional forms for the planned enrollment report and the PHS 398 Cumulative Inclusion Enrollment Report. These are related to projects in which research using human subjects is proposed. For research involving human subjects, vertebrate animals, stem cells, or select agents, what you choose in one form will influence the other forms. And we'll talk about these at the end of this section of the webinar. But for now, let's focus on the mandatory sections of the application. I will review these forms in order, but we'll focus primarily on the specific parts that are unique to the F99 part of the DSPAN. So again, just to reiterate an important point, you need to recognize that and accept that the application instruction guide is always in a state of being updated. And so it's best not to use a PDF of the application guide that you may have downloaded months ago, because it may have changed since then. And keep in mind also that there is that hierarchy that I mentioned before with the very general application guide instructions, the more specific instructions for individual fellowships, and then the instructions that are provided to you in the funding announcement, where the funding announcement instructions always trump anything else. You can always use the find function in Adobe to help you find all the relevant text that is related to a particular question. If you have particular things that you think you don't fully understand what is going on in the various instructions. So if we could go on, I wanted to briefly mention an important component of the fellowship section, the letters of reference. You want to be asking people to write your letters of reference now, because they are required, and if you don't have a sufficient number of letters of reference submitted at the deadline for your application will not move forward and cannot be reviewed. There is an art to asking for letters of reference. You should always provide your reference letter writers with all the information they need to write you a good letter. This would include your complete CV, a link to the funding announcement so that they know what you're applying for, a written description of your current research and your future plans, and instructions on what aspects of your work or your training you would like them to comment on. I encourage you to think critically about who you're asking to write a letter for you and ensure that those individuals can speak to all of the different aspects on which you will be judged. You want to ask people to write letters of reference for you who actually know you and know about your qualifications as a scientist. So if we now move on to the so-called SF424 Form 1, which is also known as the cover sheet. It's 2 pages, and it has a lot of detailed nuts and bolts type information. But there are some F99 specific components here. For example, on item 12, the start date that you need to request in there is the start of the F99 phase. The earliest start date is September 2017. So that would be the date that you would want to put in that application, into that box on the cover sheet. The second is the end date. That is the end date of the K00 phase. So basically that would be either 5 or 6 years after the start date, depending on if you're requesting 1 year of F99 support or 2 years of F99 support. You should request the total time you believe you'll need for each phase and what you believe you can justify for the research and training you're proposing to do. Again, the maximum you can request is a total of 6 years. Item 15 concerns the estimated project funding. This would cover both phases, both F99 and K00. You want to use the budget section in the RFA to help you with this, this entry. This is an estimate only. Don't stress about the exact number. With help from grants people at your institution, you can use the information in the budget section of the RFA to come up with your total requested budget. You will have to guesstimate the K00 cost, considering what are the allowable costs there. If an award is made, the NIH Grants Management Specialist will verify the tuition and fees and other expenses for the F99 phase, and at the time of transition to the K00 phase, your K00 institution will be submitting a new budget page as part of the transition application. While there are directions for the transition application in the funding announcement, you can ignore them now because they only apply at the time of the transition. Item 21 is the cover letter. In the cover letter, you want to cite the RFA and to include the list of individuals who will provide references for you, including their name, departmental affiliation, and institution. The list of referees is also an attachment in the application. So now I want to talk about Part B, the PHS Supplemental Form. This is, you can have up to 6 pages on this section. And in this section, you want to be sure to follow the RFA instructions, summarize your research and scientific experiences in chronological order, discuss how your overall training goals will enhance your development and how they relate to your career goal to become a productive and independent neuroscience researcher. You want to discuss how the proposed research training plan for each phase, for the K99 phase and the K00 phase, will enhance your conceptual knowledge and technical and professional skills, and how that training plan for each phase is anticipated to facilitate your transition to the next career stage. I want to emphasize the importance of including both a timeline and milestones for that timeline for both the F99 and K00 phases. So in Part C, so-called Form 2, this is a very important section of the application, the specific aims, research strategy, etc. The specific aims and research strategy are very specific components for this in the way in which they are structured for this particular RFA. And I'd like to emphasize the importance of following the instructions in the RFA for these two components. Selection of sponsor section refers to your dissertation research advisor, that is your F99 sponsor or multiple sponsors, but it's for the F99 only. Training in the responsible conduct of research is a required component for all fellowship applications. It's important to pay attention to each of the 5 required points for training in the responsible conduct of research, particularly noting the duration of your proposed training and its frequency. You need to follow the instructions that are provided in the fellowship application guide to complete that one-page section. So if we now move to the specific aims page, for the F99 K00 application, all applicants will use the structure of the 3 specific aims that is shown here on this slide. This particular format will ensure that applications address both the F99 and K00 phases, and it will avoid any potential overlap problems for those who already have F31 awards, for example, who are also now applying for the F99. In addition, we believe that this structure will help reviewers focus on the potential of applicants for this DSPAN program. Keep in mind the specific aims page is limited to a single page. You can, of course, customize any other components of the text that you provide on this page so that they are specific to your project, but you want to have Aim 1 describe your progress to date on your dissertation research project. Aim 2 will discuss the work that you need to complete on your dissertation project during the the F99 phase. And Aim 3 will focus on the direction for your postdoctoral research. The next section of the application is the research strategy. For this section, you have 6 pages. And this is structured in a bit of a different way from a traditional fellowship or research grant application where typically there is a hypothesis, proposed experiment, and how you will interpret the data. Instead, we encourage here a broad, comprehensive viewpoint when you write this section using a narrative style. You want to relate each of the aims to your career goals and also to consider the review criteria as you're writing this section. Note that an innovation section is not required, and you do want to consider the significance or importance of the overall question that you are addressing. So now we're going to look at each of the specific aims and talk about that component of the research strategy section. Aim 1, the dissertation research project, what you have done so far, the goal, the rationale, the hypotheses, and the progress you have made so far. You want to highlight the skills and techniques that will contribute to your long-term career goal. The section will provide the background and significance for your dissertation project. It is certainly appropriate to include research results that you've obtained to date, but you do want to write this in a narrative style. Aim 2 is about the work that you propose to do during the proposed F99 award phase. And we anticipate that this is the aim that's going to receive the most scrutiny by the reviewers. So incorporating some of the traditional format, that is, what is the hypothesis you are testing, the proposed study that will examine that hypothesis and how you will interpret the data and what you will do if the data turn out in a way different than you anticipate is recommended for this particular section. Again, we encourage you to highlight the new skills that you're going to learn during the remainder of your dissertation research project. So finally, the third aim focuses on the direction for your postdoctoral research. Aim 3 should be written in a narrative style, since it's quite likely too early for you to describe specific experiments that you would be conducting during the K00 postdoctoral phase. We don't believe that applicants should identify a specific postdoctoral mentor in this section. It's unrealistic for you to have already identified the lab in which you would be conducting your postdoctoral research if you need several more years of graduate training. So for Aim 3, you should describe, again using a narrative style, the general research direction for the K00 phase, including technical and career development skills that you propose to acquire, as well as the plan that you're going to use to identify a postdoctoral mentor. That is, to identify the best lab for you to achieve your goals. So you should not name a postdoctoral mentor, but we do suggest that you describe the attributes of the institution and the mentor or mentors that you would like to, that you would seek for your postdoctoral training. If you receive an F99 award, you will, in the future, submit a transition application following the instructions in the RFA prior to receiving the K00 award. This application will be more like a traditional application and would include specific aims and research strategy for your postdoctoral project. It's going to provide the kind of details that we're saying we aren't looking for in Aim 3. Evaluation of the transition application down the road will be done by a project team from the NIH Neuroscience Blueprint, and will look at your postdoctoral research plan in terms of its focus on neuroscience, your progress during the F99 phase, and other variables. But again, at this point, Aim 3 is a broader picture of your interests and your goals for your research training as a postdoc. So the next section, Part D, the sponsor and co-sponsor statements. This is for the F99 phase. This is a 6-page section, no more than 6 pages. This section is typically written by your sponsors. It is not written by you. And the 6 pages should also include any information related to any co-sponsors you may have. There are 5 components to this section, and they are labeled A through E in the instructions. The first is the research support that is available. You don't want to have your mentor here recapitulate any information that is provided in the sponsor's biosketch. But what is presented here is to list those grants that will be used to support your dissertation research. The next section is about prior trainees. This information is used by the reviewers to help assess the sponsor's track record in successfully mentoring individuals. So your sponsor should be providing the number of prior trainees that each sponsor has trained. They provide details for up to 5 previous trainees per sponsor. The co-sponsor information may or may not be relevant depending on their role in your training project. For example, if the co-sponsor will be providing clinical perspective, that individual's training record may be less relevant. But if your co-sponsor is going to provide extensive career mentoring and, for example, has trained many more students than your sponsor has, then it's very important that their information be provided so that a full picture is available to the review panel. The third section is the training plan that is provided by the sponsors. I'd like you to keep in mind that the training plan described by the sponsors should be in agreement with the goals that you've previously described in Part B. If the sponsor's training plan is out of alignment with your goals, the reviewers are going to question whether all of you are actually talking to one another, and that won't serve you well at review. So this training plan should be personalized for your background and strengths and should be consistent with all aspects of the application. It should address training areas where you need more development and should, again, as I said, be aligned with your career goals. You want to make sure that the role of any co-sponsor is very clear here and that the inclusion of any co-sponsor is clearly adding value to your training plan. While the training plan may be written solely by the primary sponsor or by the sponsoring team, or perhaps with each sponsor writing a separate section, it's important that it be clear if the section is written as a collective that everyone has contributed to the development of that. I encourage the sponsors to just be very explicit about that so that the reviewers understand that the co-sponsors are actively engaged in your training. The environment and research facilities, this is a section that generally sponsors are very strategic about what they describe here so that it doesn't merely repeat everything that is stated in the other section entitled Facilities and Other Resources. The fifth section is the number of current trainees who will be supervised during the fellowship period. Important to include this for each sponsor. Sometimes reviewers become concerned if the lab is really large. They will worry that you will not receive adequate attention and mentoring by the sponsor. So if it is a large group in which you are working, we recommend that the sponsor describe how the lab is structured and the organization and the frequency of interactions between the sponsor and you. The last section concerns your qualifications. And this is the sponsor's chance to say what a wonderful, outstanding, promising candidate you are. The description here, of course, should match the training plan. So if the sponsor says that you're wonderful in all aspects here, then the reviewers could often wonder why it is that you need all this training. Again, this could be written by the primary sponsor, by the team of sponsors, or by each sponsor writing a separate section. Regardless of how it's organized, it all needs to fit within the 6 pages. At this point, I want to remind everyone that there is no expectation that the F99 institutional commitment includes a commitment of a postdoctoral position. The commitment concerns the institutional commitment to you during your predoctoral training and the transition in identifying the best postdoctoral position for you. Typically, the postdoc is going to occur at a different institution in order to maximize your training potential from that opportunity. The next section, Part D, is letters of support from collaborators, contributors, and consultants. This is, again, another 6-page maximum section. The letters of support are not the same as reference letters. These are signed statements from any individual who will be collaborating or consulting with you on this project. The letters will state and confirm that they will participate in the project, and they will describe the specific role of each collaborator and consultant. If you have advisory committee members, they should also provide signed statements, or alternatively, all of the members of the advisory committee could sign a single letter describing how they are going to provide you with advice. Again, these statements should confirm each individual's participation, describe their roles, and document the expertise that they will contribute. Generally, individuals on an advisory committee do not need to provide biographical sketches. Part E of the application describes institutional environment and commitment to training. Here, the institution will document a strong, well-established research program that is related to your area of interest. They should describe opportunities for intellectual interactions with other investigators and other individuals in training. For example, courses that are offered that are relevant to you, journal clubs, seminars, retreats, other opportunities for you to present. This statement should also indicate facilities and other resources that will be available to you for your career enhancement and for the research that is proposed in the application. Now, getting back to these other research training plan sections, although we will touch base on the human subjects and vertebrate animals later, but you must include a resource sharing plan to the extent that these resource sharing is relevant to the proposed research. Reviewers will comment on whether the data sharing plan, sharing model organisms, and genomic data sharing plans are reasonable or whether the rationale for not sharing these resources is reasonable. Note that you do not need to include a plan to authenticate biological and or chemical resources. Again, there is a Part G for budget. You want to be sure to check the box for tuition and fees. Part H concerns the appendix. You don't want to disobey the rules about appendices because that can lead to having your application not being reviewed. And at this point in time, there are only an extremely limited number of circumstances in which appendices are allowed. So I want to move now to talking about the senior and key personnel profile. Fellowship awards require a primary sponsor, and there may also be co-sponsors, consultants, and contributors. Each individual who is committed to contribute to the scientific development and execution of the project, including sponsors and co-sponsors, should be identified in your application as senior/key personnel, even if they do not commit any specific measurable effort to the project. Each one of these individuals also needs to provide a commons username. You, of course, are the most important person here and need to include your profile as well. You will use a different biographical sketch form page than does your sponsor, and we encourage you to take a look at the sample biosketch that is available online so that you provide the information that reviewers will expect to see in that component. Under other project information, there are a couple of important points. Although foreign institutions are not eligible to apply for this funding opportunity, foreign components are permitted. So item 6, international activities, may apply to your application. There are 2 other attachments that are described in the RFA. The so-called nomination letter and additional educational information, and also the certification letter. And we will go through each of these now. So the nomination letter comes from the institution, and it confirms that you are at the dissertation stage of your graduate training and in a PhD program in a neuroscience field, and finally, that you seek a career as an independent investigator in neuroscience. The name of your primary sponsor and the affirmation of the institution's commitment to your training and research career goals should also be a part of this letter. Note that this letter would be provided by the head of your graduate program and must be signed both by this individual and by your institution's organizational representative. This is important that this letter be included, a signed letter be included as part of your application for it to be fully responsive to the RFA. The letter may not be more than 1 page in length. Additional educational information is requested for this RFA. This attachment should include a description of your graduate program that explains the structure of the program, required milestones, their usual timing, and average time to degree over the past 10 years. In addition, we encourage that the following information be included: the frequency and method by which your program is formally monitoring and evaluating the progress of graduate students, and resources available to you, including those typically associated with an Office of Graduate Education. Finally, this section should describe your progress and status in the graduate program to date, and to relate that to the typical timeline for your graduate program. It's important that the name of the individual who has provided this information be included at the end of the description. Typically, this information is provided by the director of the graduate program. Another required component is the certification letter. This letter is from the institution, and it certifies your eligibility for support under the DSPAN program. The statement must include a clear description of how the appointment of you to the DSPAN program will expand the pool of underrepresented individuals within science on a national basis. Populations that are nationally underrepresented for the purposes of NIH diversity programs are identified in the NIH Notice of Interest in Diversity, which is available on the NIH webpage. NIH relies on data compiled and analyzed by the National Science Foundation using an evidence-based method that reviews the representation of populations across the STEM pipeline. The institutional certification letter must state the basis for your eligibility by reference to NSF national data. In addition to these data, the certification letter may also address how you would further diversity in the neuroscience workforce. Since certification takes place at the academic institution and not at the NIH, the information contained in the certification letter adds a level of transparency in alignment with program goals for the reviewers. The certification letter from your institution must be on institutional letterhead and scanned so that an official institutional signature is visible on the letter. We request that this letter be in PDF format and that have a specific name, Diversity Eligibility Letter. And this is described in the funding announcement. Again, this is a required component for the application. If it is missing from the application, your application would not be considered complete and could not be reviewed. We're getting down to the last few slides here. R&R other project information. In both the project summary abstract and in the project narrative sections, be sure to address both phases of the DSPAN award, both K99 and R00. While items 9, 10, and 11 are not explicitly required, it is typical for fellowship applications to include these sections, and we recommend that you do so also. Please note that there are specific circumstances in which information can be submitted after your application has been received by the NIH. These are so-called post-submission materials, and these are sort of like just-in-time before review kinds of information that may be submitted on your behalf by your institutional official to the scientific review officer. And there are a couple of two particular types of information that can be very important to consider providing if it comes in after your application has been submitted. One is information about sponsor funding. For example, if your sponsor receives news of an NIH grant award after your application is submitted, and that is relevant to your particular project, that is the kind of information that reviewers would want to know about. Another particular category that can be important is if you have news of a paper that has been accepted for publication. So in those kinds of circumstances, you would want to contact the program officer who is assigned to your application or to the scientific review officer to find out how to provide that information. Generally, that information must be provided no less than 30 days before the review meeting. Okay, performance sites. So here you want to list all sites where the research will be done. Typically, the primary site is where is the institution that is submitting the application. But in some cases, there may be an additional institution or location that is involved in your research, and they would be listed as a secondary site. Now I want to turn this back over to Michelle, and she's going to talk about the review criteria.
Hello again. Thank you, Nancy. I think that was extremely helpful and detailed, not only for the F99, but also perhaps learning just about NIH process. Now I'll quickly highlight components of the review criteria. Keep in mind that all of what I will highlight has already been detailed by Nancy from the perspective of the input, and now you'll be getting it from the perspective of the assessment by the study section. How you will be judged by the reviewers is really not a secret. We tell folks that all the time when it comes to the training awards. It is included in the FOA, and once you finish writing your application, the best advice is for you and your mentor to check what you have written against this published review criteria. It can be found in Section 5. Let's take a quick look at the sections. The first is applicant. In the applicant, and I won't just go and read the slide. This has been copy and pasted from the FOA itself. The gist of what they're looking for in terms of the applicant is that they really will be looking at your past productivity, what you're doing currently with respect to your dissertation research, and what are your plans for the future. That is, what does your prior training show about you in terms of your potential, and based on your current work, do they predict future success? And do you seem committed to a neuroscience research career? Basically, will your current point A help you get to point B? Second, sponsors, collaborators, and consultants. That is the team around you. The reviewers will be looking at, does it make sense, this team that you have assembled? Are these the right talent agents to help you get to the next step? Can they support you financially? And also with respect to your professional development, can they provide the right supports? Nancy and I both mentioned the fact that you could have not only one mentor, but perhaps a co-mentor or even a mentoring team. If you have that, you should clearly describe how all will coordinate the mentoring of you, the candidate. The next is the research training plan. Like any other research that NIH would invest in, does this project have scientific merit? Is the proposed research project sufficiently distinct from your sponsored funded research for your career stage? Is it appropriate? Is the proposed research relevant to your stated career objectives? That is, does this research training plan align with the goals of the career development plan? It should once again make sense. And in broad strokes, have you developed a sound game plan for determining the next step or the selection of your postdoc mentor for the K00 phase? For the training potential and development plan, as I stated for the research training plan, do the two align? Will you get the skills that you actually need? Does the plan prepare you for a successful transition? These are the questions that the reviewers will be asking. Also, have you convinced reviewers that you have a plan that takes advantage of not only your strengths, but also really addresses the gaps in your needed skills? That is, why do you need this training? Why does this matter to your development? The institutional environment and commitment to training. In general, is the institution demonstrating commitment to your current success? And will they facilitate and foster your future preparation for the transition? Once again, reviewers will not be looking for a commitment from your current institution for them to promise you a postdoc position. That is not the purpose of this award. They really are focused on what they're doing for you at the F99 phase, and also how are they going to help you to get to the next step. And speaking of next steps, this is just our little take-home messaging. The first part, confirm your eligibility. You definitely don't want to waste your time putting together an application for something that you're not eligible for. The second, talk to your current mentor and devise a timeline to submit a competitive application by April 8th. This is an RFA. We do not have any multiple receipt dates. Right now, April 8th is it. And so the purpose of having this webinar now was to give you the time to put together your mentoring team and to have that back and forth to decide if this was the right fit for you in terms of the DSPAN. The third is submit a letter of intent by March 9th. Let us know that you have an intention of applying to this mechanism. This helps us for planning purposes and to make sure we have the right reviewers. And finally, receive feedback. Don't work in isolation with putting together this application. Take advantage of not only your mentor, your mentoring team, perhaps peers. Get feedback on the application itself. Revise your work, and rewatch this webinar as necessary. Nancy did an excellent job of going point by point in terms of what the FOA is stating in terms of what we're looking for. A lot of times people have challenges understanding just perhaps the NIH speak that's written in the FOAs. This webinar has hopefully taken a step-by-step detailed overview of what we are looking for. So the suggestion would be to, once you have the application or a draft, is to look at the webinar again and see if you're hitting the points that we mentioned. Our goal today is to help you put together a competitive application. We want you to succeed. This webinar will be archived, and you'll be able to look at it. We'll have it archived on the various NIH Blueprint Institute's websites, also the NIH Blueprint website itself, and then also our moderator, Lauren, will be sending you a direct link once the webinar has the ability to be shared. Finally, we want to hear from you. We want to hear not only today your questions and issues, but also in the future, beyond today. I'm the initial point of contact. You're free to send me an email about eligibility or anything else that you have questions. And so speaking of questions, now let's open it up. Lauren will moderate.
Okay, so we've had some questions come in over the course of the webinar, and I want to encourage you to keep submitting. We will keep the webinar going for as long as we have questions to answer. Well, until 3 o'clock at least. So in addition to our speakers, we also have Ashley Vantvier, who's a program officer at NIMH in the Office of Research Training and Career Development, and Edgardo Falcon Morales, who is in the Diversity Office with Michelle and I at NINDS, as well as Liz Weber, who is in charge of some of the review that we do at NINDS in the training program. So all of us are here available to answer your questions. So our first question is, can a candidate hold a Diversity Supplement Award or an F31 and still qualify for the F99 K00 award?
Yes, as we stated, having an award like an F31, an appointment on a T32, or a diversity supplement does not disqualify you for applying for the F99. You are still eligible.
Can you talk a little bit more about the level of research experience in neuroscience that might be expected by reviewers? So let's say you have a background in engineering, but you're doing neuroscience research. Could you still apply for the DSPAN?
Absolutely, so long as your project is would be seen by staff as being relevant to neuroscience and the institutes at the NIH who are participating in this funding opportunity. Yes, indeed. I would encourage folks to contact Michelle and and confirm that the topic area falls within the scope of what we signed responses to this RFA in terms of the proposed science before you complete your application.
And that's a great point, Nancy. The other part is that we've talked about neuroscience pretty broadly. Not all neuroscience institutes at the NIH are represented on this particular FOA, meaning that even though it may be even neuroscience, it may not be an institute that's participating. So the safest way to go is to just send us your specific aims, and we'll assure you whether it is a go or not.
What kind of preliminary data should be included in the DSPAN application?
So, because of the way and the timing of this award, the fact that an individual is applying typically in their 3rd or 4th year and that it's during the dissertation phase, the expectation is that you have some level of preliminary data, that you have some evidence of feasibility with respect to your project and can demonstrate that in the application.
Okay. So what kind of guidance is provided to the graduate student when they're doing the transition to the K00? So let's say you have the F99. How do they know what to do during the transition? Well,
before the transition, while you're completing your dissertation, you need to be thinking about what it is that you want to do as a postdoc, and begin to think about that in very concrete terms, because you need to begin to identify potential postdoctoral mentors, institutions that you might consider doing a postdoc at, because all of that process of identifying and obtaining a commitment to a postdoctoral position is part of what you're going to be doing during the F99, the first phase of the DSPAN award. The K00, the second phase, starts when you begin in the postdoctoral lab. So the transition itself in a sense, is part of the F99. And there, you will have your mentor team, and you're also going to probably be taking advantage of feedback from NIH staff about things to think about as you're looking for postdocs.
We've had two questions about health insurance coverage. So is health insurance, are there funds provided for health insurance in both phases?
So in a fellowship award, there is a standard allowance that is provided that would include funds for health insurance. During the K00 phase, this would be part of the fringe benefit contribution that the NIH would provide to support your K00 because you will be an employee of the postdoctoral institution, and this would be part of your benefits as an employee.
Just to reiterate, do applicants need to be in the dissertation phase or post-qualifying exams at the time of submitting the application?
So the language is that by the time the application is submitted, you must have a nomination letter stating that you are in the dissertation phase. It could be for unique situations that currently you are not. Say, it's January now, and by April, you could transition to that. It's by the time of submission, and you have to have the ability for your institution to be able to write you that nomination letter saying that you are in the dissertation phase.
So let me just add on to Michelle's response to this, and there may be some distinctions among different disciplines in terms of the dissertation stage, if you will, and what that means, so that if you have questions about this particular point based on your idiosyncrasy of your graduate program, I would suggest that you consult with Michelle before you, as you're beginning to develop your application, to make sure that everyone is on the same page about this point.
So another question here asks, how closely should we work with our mentor to prepare our application?
This is a mentored award. You should work very closely with your mentor. As Nancy has highlighted, there are actually some components where they should be writing it. We've called it sponsor, but in terms of the language, that should be synonymous with the mentor. Your mentor should be helping you through this. This is perhaps your first time submitting an individual NIH award, but hopefully for your mentor, that is not their first time. And so a good mentor will help you, will give you the room to develop this on your own and to use this as a training and a lesson for you to grow, but also will use this as a time to give you feedback, to help you revising it, not writing it for you, but giving you feedback. Your mentor should be a partner in this process.
So another question, several questions coming in about sponsors and co-sponsors. So do co-sponsors need to be faculty at the same institution that the applicant is at? And also, could someone at a staff researcher level be listed as a co-sponsor?
Well, in terms of being at the institution that you're at, certainly we would think what is typical is that your primary mentor would reside where you are. But in terms of co-mentors, there could be examples. I mean, schools in certain areas that are basically down the street, co-located, people that perhaps are already on your defense committee, or there could be really good cases for why you would have someone that is not exactly at your primary institution. The key here and what we highlighted was in terms of the training plan and in terms of where they talk about the relationship between the sponsor and you, you have to outline how will they interact with you, how will they meet with you, how will they contribute to your development. The more remote a person is from where you're residing, there's going to be skepticism about what is the real relationship. Is this a name only, or is this a real mentorship? You have to state the case and prove the case.
So the other question was with regard to whether someone who has is at a staff researcher level could be a co-sponsor. Again, I think this is the kind of question that we often answer with the phrase, well, it all depends on the particular case. So again, it would be important to build the case for the skills and knowledge that that individual would be providing to help mentor you. I could imagine a scenario where an individual at in a core resource center, for example, who has a very specialized skill set that you need to learn to complete your dissertation research may provide a strong component to your mentor team or group. But again, it all depends on the circumstance of your particular application.
So another question about the sponsor. So does the sponsor have to be funded by one of the participating NIH institutes? So let's say the sponsor is NIH funded and the work is responsive, but they don't actually have funding from one of the blueprint ICs on the FOA.
That's not an issue. Even with our F31, we've seen cases where the research that the trainee is focused on has perhaps moved from where the parent grant, or not the parent grant, but the mentor's original scope of research was. The fact is that a lot of our institutes also have research areas that almost touch each other. So that's not a real issue. And in terms of the NIH funding itself, you can also imagine someone who had HHMI funding, DOD funding, so that's not a criteria. However, the dissertation project that you describe and that you're working on, the reviewers in NIH have to see that this just isn't a case of you trying to morph the project to fit the funders, that this is something that truly stands as something that's relevant to the NIH Blueprint Institutes.
Another question, if somebody is awarded an F99, are they still able to keep other NIH training funding, or would they have to give that training funding up?
So that's an easy question to answer. The answer is that you would not be able to retain the other streams of NIH funding if you were to be awarded an F99.
Okay, another question about mentors. Are international co-mentors allowed?
Again, it's the same principle. It all depends on the particular case of your situation. I would generally imagine that an international mentor would provide a very unique, although of course that's a ridiculous phrase, but quite a unique resource that did not exist. Because again, in the case of an international mentor, the reviewers may have more questions about the actual integration of that individual into your mentoring and the frequency and quality of your interaction. Not to say you shouldn't do it, but there needs to be a really good plan.
In terms of choosing reference letters, should they come solely from faculty, or could recommendations come from other people that you can speak to your expertise, say a staff scientist?
It's this word again. But it all depends. But remember, the point of the references is that the study section is comprised of people that are well known in the field, who have stature, and so they want to hear from other people who are their peers about how great you are and how you have this potential. And these people should be people that not only know you, know your work, can speak to you as a person, not in generic terms, but also a person to whom you would view that if they're sitting around, if a committee is sitting around and looking at a letter from their peer, that there would be a level of respect about what they're saying about you. So that would be the answer that I would give, and I think that goes beyond just the title of the person, but how they're known within either your specific research area, community, or neuroscience in general.
So another question here about the transition. So if awarded the F99, is the K00 portion guaranteed upon completing the application, or is it a competitive process?
So it is administratively reviewed, meaning you won't, in terms of how we use the words competitive, that would mean going back out to review and going to a study section. That is not the case. However, the K00 is not automatic. Internally, as Nancy mentioned, the NIH Blueprint training team will look at the application that you submit, and these components are outlined in the FOA. Right now, you wouldn't worry about that as you're applying for this initial F99, but say you receive the award, you would look that over and know that when it came time for you to transition to the postdoc, you would put together a more traditional application. You'll have the specific aims, you'll have the environment, the mentoring team, a training plan, and this will all be reviewed in-house or an administrative review. And once again, it's not a guarantee. We will look at the suitability for the transition. Is it still neuroscience relevant? Is it a competitive environment? Do we believe that this offers you the opportunity to get to what is the end goal, that is a successful, independent research career?
Okay. I'd like to have you guys talk a little bit more about the different aims. So specifically, can you talk about sort of aim 2 and sort of the research to be completed versus aim 3 and how you might not know exactly who the mentor is going to be. So how should you frame this in the different aims when you're putting your application together?
Well, I think that aim 2 is perhaps the most traditional, if you will, or conventional piece of the application, and would be more like if you've seen other fellowship applications, what you might expect to see in a in the research strategy section of an individual predoctoral fellowship application. So you're going to talk about the project, the studies remaining in your dissertation, the hypotheses, how you're going to test them, how you're going to analyze the data, keeping in mind the importance of data rigor, and how you're going to interpret the data. And if the data don't turn out the way you expect, how that might alter the next study in the proposed project. Aim 3 is, I would call it a more like a 10,000-foot view, if you will, of your of what you want to do, the direction for your postdoctoral research. Aim 2 is kind of down in the weeds of the project, of your dissertation project and the specific experiments that you want to do in order to complete the PhD dissertation. Aim 3 is you're going to step back, if you will, and it's more of a thought experiment. How to provide a context for you've done this research as a graduate student and been driven by an interest in some particular question, scientific topic area, and as you think about as you currently think about where it is where you want to go, what you want to learn as a postdoc, then you're going to be talking about this, what I want to do in very broad strokes. This is not saying I want to, the first study I'm going to do as a postdoc is I'm going to do fiber photometry in the basolateral amygdala because I want to test this specific hypothesis related to anxiety like behavior in female animals. That's way too granular. So you need to step back and think about what it is what is the general question that interests me that I want to pursue as a postdoc? What are the new skills that I want to learn? Some people, when they go into a postdoc, they may have, as a graduate student, for example, done very sophisticated electrophysiology in tissue culture or in slices, and they decide that they want to gain a broader perspective on the physiology of brain, and they want to learn how to do really sophisticated multi-unit and multiple electrode recording, to do fiber photometry, to have hundreds of electrodes in a brain and in awake behaving animal so that they can ask questions at a different level of analysis. But in order to, I think, to write AIM-3, you have to have an idea of what you want to do. Not a detailed idea, because we also, I think, expect that people might change their minds in some way because, of course, there's always new knowledge coming out, new tools being developed that people want to learn and apply to a particular question. But in thinking about what is the question that is driving my interest in neuroscience? What do I need? What do I want to do next?
Yeah, and I think AIM-3 is really, if probably many of you or some of you have done an individual development plan, and you'll be asked for your short-term and your long-term goals or your 5-year planning goals, that's AIM-3. You're really taking a look and saying, I have ownership of my science, I have ownership of where I'm going. Where do I want to end up? What do I want to gain out of this training experience? So really, like Nancy said, we don't want to pigeonhole you. The expectation isn't that AIM-2 and AIM-3 match together. It could be that for your dissertation or for your postdoc research direction, you're taking a piece of the techniques, the things that you've learned during your graduate training, and maybe going into another avenue. That's what often happens in postdocs. And so I think AIM-3 is really you taking a step back and saying, with this neuroscience training that I have, what do I want to do? And how will I show the reviewers that, once again, I really have taken ownership of my science and that I've thought about it and that I have the potential to develop into independence.
So let me just remind you of one of the questions in the review criteria under research training plan. There are a number of them, and I think they're all very important questions, but in terms of this particular question from one of our viewers, the question that the reviewers are asked to consider is the following. Is the research direction outlined for the K00 phase appropriate to the applicant's anticipated stage of development and as a vehicle for developing the research skills described in the career development plan? This is not a question about that's real granular. it's a fairly macro-level question. What is you're going to be outlining your research direction, and how is that going to help you learn the skills that you believe you want to acquire as a postdoc? And remember, you only have 6 pages in this section for aims 1, 2, and 3. 6 pages is not a lot of pages.
Okay, so we have one more question in the queue. So if anybody else listening has any questions, please send them in as soon as possible. Otherwise, we will wrap up. So the last question is, for the introduction page of the specific aims, should there be a focus on who we are as a scientist or a focus on our project?
So I'm not sure what the question means about the introduction page of the specific aims, because the specific aims is 1 page in length. So I'm wondering perhaps the question refers to like the beginning before you say specific aim 1, blah, 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 blah.
Or is it the fellowship?
I think it's probably referring to sort of the extra text that might contextualize the specific aims page, the introductory paragraph.
So typically on a specific aims page, just in general, not unique to this particular, yes, the intro paragraph. Okay, so typically on a specific aims page, regardless of the particular funding announcement to which someone is responding, people provide some context for the specific aims, scientific context for why this is important, how this relates to biomedical research, improving health, etc. And
the CV is going to be you. So on your bio sketch, that's where you would talk more about you as a scientist and how you are you know, what your perspective is and what you're bringing to the project.
And your contributions to date. But the specific aims page is really more, is typically about the science and the project. Although, of course, I think in this particular funding announcement, there is more, in my opinion, it seems like there's more integration of the, with the training goals, if you will. There may be more discussions related to that. But in this introductory paragraph, generally it's most about the science, although if you have room, I think it's great if you can integrate, make really clear to the reviewers the specific skills you're going to acquire, what they are, because generally reviewers read the specific aims page if they aren't assigned to provide a full review of your application. So it can provide a nice one-page snapshot, if you will, for them.
So I guess to wrap up, we've had a couple of questions sort of asking, you know, how large is the application pool? What's the award rate going to be? And things of that nature. So just wanted to say that this is the first time that the Blueprint is offering this award, so we don't know how many applications we will get, and so we can't really give you any historical statistics. And also to reiterate what Michelle said, that currently this is an RFA, so there is only one application deadline of April 8th, and we don't know what the future may hold.
Exactly, and this is, I mean, this is a very exciting opportunity for someone to get this type of support, you know, 2 years at the most at the graduate phase and up to 4 years at the postdoc level. And so this is a time to gamble. This is a time to focus on putting the most competitive application you can put together and not worry about statistics. If you put together a competitive, compelling, strong application, it could be you. And so for something like this, these one-time shots, I would worry about putting together the competitive application and not worry so much about the statistics.
And, you know, if you don't apply, you're not going to get any money.
Exactly.
So, you know, give it your best shot.
Is there anything else that our speakers would like to emphasize before we sign off?
No, I mean, we're really looking forward to a nice response to this FOA. We've thought long and hard about this initiative, and we really would like the positive outcomes from it. We're here to help you. We're here to answer any questions that you may have regarding eligibility. Nancy brought up a great point about dissertation, about mission relevance. These are all things that, if you're in doubt, just ask us. Don't necessarily take yourself out of the game. We're more than willing to answer your questions and to work with you. The other thing that I mentioned before is that this was a long webinar, but our hope was that, you know, you'll be able to come back to it. It'll be archived, and it'll be a great resource for you to as you draft the application, to come back and to listen. And so thank you. I don't know if Nancy has parting words as well.
So I want to thank you for your persistence, shall we say, for the duration of the webinar, and really to reinforce Michelle's statement about that we are here to help. If you don't ask questions, you can't take advantage of our technical assistance and feedback to you. So don't assume, ask questions if you aren't 100% sure.
All right, get writing. Bye-bye.
Bye.
All right, thank you. The recording should be posted in a couple of weeks.